Elliotte Friedman went and detailed so much info around this situation. No matter what they do, they'll have to do something extra. Elliotte Friedman also had a quote when it comes to Montreal and Jack Eichel. Hello guys, welcome back. My name is Nathan, and today we're going to be talking about some huge Montreal Canadiens trade rumors and a ton of news that's come out since the Kotkaniemi offer sheet. Now obviously Kotkaniemi has been offer sheeted by the Carolina Hurricanes, but there's been a ton that's come out in terms of trade rumors and news, and Elliotte Friedman has released a new 31 Thoughts podcast detailing all the trade rumors and all the news we need to know about how the Montreal Canadiens are thinking, what they're going to do next, and what moves they could potentially make. So what are the Montreal Canadiens thinking in this whole situation? What moves could we possibly see from Marc Bergevin in Montreal? And what will be the end result of this whole situation? Watch till the end for all the trade rumors and all the news, and make sure you hit that subscribe button. 60% of people watching are not subscribed. If you like hockey, if you like the Habs, but if you like the NHL, this channel is the place to be. Now, once again, after all the news settled when it comes to Kotkaniemi, Elliotte Friedman went on his 31 Thoughts podcast and detailed so much info around this situation and also the processes led up to it. He notes that Montreal did offer Kotkaniemi a 2-year, $2.5 million deal, and that's where they wanted to get Kotkaniemi signed to, but Kotkaniemi did not want to agree to a longer term. Also, the money wasn't quite working for him either. So both sides led Kotkaniemi to kind of be at a standstill with Montreal, and for Carolina to eventually swoop in, offer that 1-year, $6.1 million deal, and for Kotkaniemi to eventually accept it. But there's so many layers to this whole situation, it's kind of incredible. And with Kotkaniemi as a 21-year-old center, he still has a lot of value for the future, and I still think he'll be a great player in the future. But this is a player that right now is, especially regular season-wise, nothing really more than average, and especially for the Montreal Canadiens, even though he is that type of player that isn't excelling yet, he's still a player that's pretty valuable to the Montreal Canadiens system, especially come playoff time. And with the Canadiens' lack of centermen, Kotkaniemi also being gone prevents some really big issues for the Montreal Canadiens. If they decide to not match Kotkaniemi, their center core is Nick Suzuki, Jake Evans, and Cedric Paquette. That's absolutely horrendous past Nick Suzuki, and that creates some big problems that Montreal needs to fix. And when it comes to Montreal, they're pretty much in a lose-lose situation here. They can either match the offer sheets, bring on a $6.1 million cap hit, and have to move off somebody else off the team, or they cannot match, sure, get the first and third round pick, but also not really have too much center depth at all, and have a whole situation that they do need to solve. So for me, when it comes to Montreal, no matter what they do, they'll have to do something extra to keep Kotkaniemi or to let him go, and I feel like for Montreal, the roster, especially right now, would not be complete whatsoever. But Elliotte Friedman said this as well after the fact, and I thought this was pretty interesting. He said this: I do think there is a legitimate chance Montreal is considering not matching the offer sheet. And this is what we've been talking about as well when it comes to Montreal, is that when it comes to the Habs system right now, yes, they be just barren center-wise without Kotkaniemi, but especially when it comes to the cap space and also having to give him $6.1 million as a actual tender next year, or a tender offer next year if they weren't going to extend him, it would also create some problems for next year, potentially, if they do tender him as an RFA next year. So in terms of Montreal's cap space, it doesn't bode well for them, and even though they'd be just stripped down center-wise without him, at the same time, $6.1 million is a lot for Kotkaniemi, and you get a first and third round pick, which again could be used to trade for someone else. Now, Elliotte Friedman has a ton more quotes, but this next one I think is super, super interesting. Again, not just because of the Montreal Canadiens mindset, but potentially what they could do with the compensation picks coming back in the Kotkaniemi deal. Now, when he says this in a quote, I could see Montreal going to Arizona and saying, how would a first and third be for Dvorak? Do we have the framework for a deal here? And that to me is super interesting because he, in the same podcast, he doesn't just mention Dvorak out of nowhere. He also points to Eric Engel's article speculating about Dvorak being a guy that Montreal goes after with those compensation picks. So not only Eric Engels is collaborating on that, also Elliotte Friedman is pointing Dvorak out as a big potential option for the Montreal Canadiens. Now, personally for me, for Montreal, it's a major upgrade going from Kotkaniemi to Dvorak. On paper, right now, I think that's a big upgrade, and Dvorak as a second-line center provides a lot of good two-way value and is pretty underrated in my opinion. And although he wouldn't be a complete answer. I mean, you still have a little bit of a lack of center depth. Having Christian Dvorak there and Nick Suzuki is not a bad top 6 center core and actually can provide some good value. If it doesn't happen and they let Kotkaniemi go and can't find a centerman, it's Suzuki, Evans, and Paquette. I like Jake Evans a lot, but I don't see that working out for the now or the long term either. So again, we keep going back to the idea of Montreal having to make a move no matter what they do. Again, especially if they let Kotkaniemi go to Carolina, there needs to be a move made. Even if they brought Kotkaniemi back, they would have to make a move, but you could probably put Paul Byron LTR and maybe have the cap space for that. If they do let Kotkaniemi go, they need to make a move. They cannot go into that Atlantic Division next year and hope with that and pray with that center core they're going to make the playoffs, because I don't think they would. I really don't think so. Unless Suzuki just becomes a 120-point player, I really don't see it happening for the Montreal Canadiens. And I think Marc Bergevin is smart enough to know that that's not happening either. So again, he could use that first and third round pick to eventually flip that for another centerman. Now, I'm not sure if that'll be enough for Christian Dvorak, because we've had some trade rumors in the past that Arizona is looking for a first and a decent quality prospect. Nothing that's amazing, but a decent guy at the very least. And I feel like for Montreal, that'd probably be like that first round pick coming back from Kotkaniemi and maybe a prospect like maybe at most like a Matthias Norlander, but probably something a little bit smaller perhaps. I think there's a lot of options for the Montreal Canadiens, maybe like a I don't know, like a Jaden Struble perhaps, just floating it out there as potential guys that could be involved in the deal. But I don't think it would be too much, especially for Montreal, who's trying to win now, to get a second line center like Dvorak, who I think could be really, really good for the Montreal Canadiens and fit in that system well. To me, that's a price that I would pay. And especially in the situation where you can't really win, still getting a center upgrade in this situation isn't the worst thing in the world. And I feel like for Montreal, in terms of minimizing the pain right now, getting a guy like Dvorak out of this situation still isn't bad. Now, Elliotte Friedman also had a quote when it comes to Montreal and Jack Eichel, which was also pretty interesting, not just because of the new info we got, but also the info we got on past information too. Now, Elliotte Friedman said this: "I'm not sure that Montreal is really big on the Jack Eichel sweepstakes. We know now Eichel has switched agents. There's a long history between Pat Brisson and Marc Bergevin. I just wonder, does this change the dynamic between the Canadiens and the Sabres at all?" Now, Elliotte Friedman, first off, says again that he hasn't really heard anything about Jack Eichel in Montreal and that they might not be in on the Jack Eichel sweepstakes, but he also goes on to speculate that maybe a change in agent could mean something more. And I don't think it would change too much, because if Montreal's not going to pay the price now, or earlier, they're probably not going to pay the price right now, but they also have a first and a third round pick now if they do not match the Jesperi Kotkaniemi offer sheet, and they could definitely use that in a Jack Eichel situation. I mean, for me, it would be kind of interesting, because Buffalo's obviously looking for at least a couple of guys that could be on their NHL roster, but it could be interesting if you have a first round pick instead of Kotkaniemi. Maybe that's more valuable for Buffalo in the later term. Maybe they are more willing to accept a deal like that. Definitely a lot of interesting pieces, but even though Elliotte Friedman says they're not really in on Jack Eichel right now, he doesn't count him out completely, especially if they don't match Kotkaniemi and they get that first round pick. They could still be in play with Pat Brisson being now the agent of Jack Eichel. Now, Jeff Merrick in the Same 31 Thoughts podcast asked Elliotte Friedman a pretty fascinating question, and it went like this. Merrick asks Friedman, even if the Habs can't find a second line center replacement, do you have to match? And Elliotte Friedman said this: "I wouldn't if I was them. You can't look at this as a short-term thing. You have to look at it as a long-term situation, because the contract Carolina has given you has long-term ramifications." And Elliotte Friedman is 100% right with that. Again, if you are going to qualify him next year, that qualifying offer would again be $6.1 million for 1 year. Again, unless you can have an extension done. But that is definitely a great point, because when it comes to Kotkaniemi potentially being back in Montreal, the only way it really makes sense is if they also have an extension in place after the fact next year, which, with how the negotiations went this year, I'm not sure how likely that really is. And Elliotte Friedman also goes on to say that with Nick Suzuki probably getting a big contract extension this next year, after this next year, Kotkaniemi is kind of a little bit a lot less important for the Montreal Canadiens, and they might just end up trading him after this next year is done anyways. So even if Kotkaniemi does come back to Montreal, it's pretty much been reported that he's probably not going to be there for too long. I mean, we have had a lot of offer sheets where the player, yes, does come
back, but it doesn't last for too long. A great example of that is Shea Weber with the Flyers. He got accepted an offer sheet with not with the Flyers, with the Preds. He accepted an offer sheet with the Flyers, then went back to the Preds, and then eventually was traded just a year later, and it was that quick to happen. And for me with Kotkaniemi, that's another great example. I think it's going to happen. Even if Montreal does match and they're able to keep Kotkaniemi, I don't think he'd last past this season and would probably be an off-season trade, especially with, again, the difference of negotiations that both players have with Kotkaniemi and Montreal. They really don't see eye to eye right now, and I don't really see that changing even when next season comes around. And just everything about this situation, to me, pretty much leads me to believe that Montreal is not going to offer Jesperi Kotkaniemi and is just going to take those picks and use it to trade for somebody else. Whether that is a Christian Dvorak or, heaven forbid, a Dylan Strome. Please don't do that, Mark Bergevin. No, please. Anyway, whoever it is, no matter who it is, I feel like the Montreal Canadiens at this point right now, if I was Mark Bergevin, I wouldn't match it either. I would let Kotkaniemi go to Carolina. I would get a Christian Dvorak. And again, you have to make the best out of a bad situation. You obviously want to keep Jesperi Kotkaniemi and have Christian Dvorak. That would have been absolutely perfect. But this isn't a perfect world. And for Montreal, now Carolina's bitten you in the back, and you have to make the best of it. And Mark Bergevin, that is his job. That is his job, to make the best of bad situations. And I feel like using that first and third round pick, or at least using a combination of those picks to trade for somebody, is what they should do. They would have some cap space to use it. And if it is Christian Dvorak, he only makes $4.5 million for the next 4 seasons. That is perfectly manageable, and I feel like for Montreal would provide a better cap situation than Jesperi Kotkaniemi. Even if he were to sign for less than 6.1 after this next year, I feel like Dvorak's just a better deal right now, and again, is the better player, much better player right now. To me, for Montreal, they're already kind of in this win now mode right now, this window of winning, and especially with Carey Price not being here for too much longer, I feel like the Canadiens now just need to grip themselves in, try to go for the win now, and try to get a guy like Dvorak who can give them some actual top 6 stability center-wise. To me, that is the perfect situation for the Montreal Canadiens, and I think that is exactly what Mark Bergevin will end up doing. And Mark, you better listen here, bud. If you trade for Dylan Strome, we're gonna have some big problems. Anyways, I think you just should have signed Pia Suter in the first place, and you wouldn't even have this problem. But anyways, we're gonna end it off there. Thank you so much, y'all, for coming by and watching today's video. If you did enjoy, make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit that notification bell if you haven't already. Comment down below. What are your thoughts on this whole situation? What do you think the Montreal Canadiens should do right now? Should they match Jesperi Kotkaniemi's offer sheet? Should they let him go? Should they trade for somebody else? Who should they trade for? Let me know all your thoughts. Make sure you share this video with your friends. Get it out there and click on this card for all my trade rumor content right in one bingeable playlist. My name is Nathan. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great Sunday, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.